Hello everybody, how are we? Apologies, small matter of the BBC breakfast show to execute for you before we gathered here today, but I did come in and caught the end of Alastair's conversation there, and I didn't know that about the fire brigade in London, but travelling around and frequently visiting London, I will look out for that now in future visits to London. So we're going to move into the next section of the day here, which the more observant of you will already know. This is going to be a bit of a group session, a panel discussion. So Alastair's going to stay with us for this. Chris Woods is also around. I don't know whether Chris is... Chris, come on down, as they used to say on The Price is Right. Back in the old days. It's for those of you who've not had the opportunity yet, or will do so in a little while. We have this wonderful labyrinth of pathways that brings you down these steps, down here, and then you go under what feels a bit like walking out the tunnel at Wembley Stadium. Must feel like, because you sort of get funneled in, and there's this light, and then suddenly it all opens out. So maybe when Chris makes an appearance. There we are, you see. Welcome to Wembley Stadium, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And also with us for this next segment, appreciate you both coming up and joining us up on the stage here. Bill Orme. Bill, good to see you. Thanks for coming as well. And Rachel, how are you? All right?
Very well, thank you.
Very good. Rachael Percival also joining us as part of this panel discussion. And absolutely up for taking questions from the floor. You may have questions on specifics or more general areas that you like to put to these, let's be honest, big hitters when it comes to this particular area of cyber security. I just want to start with a very general question, which comes from a very, forgive me, ignorant standpoint, as someone who is merely the compare and host for this, but has very limited knowledge of this particular area of expertise, and just trying to understand this a little bit more, and hopefully you'll forgive my ignorance for this question is. But to me, this is for small businesses in particular, an area which people will just not budget for, and people will just not look in their sort of ins and outs, incomings, outgoings, profit loss spreadsheets, will not have a pot assigned for this. And when you start to talk to them about that, they all start to look very sort of glazed eyes at you, like you're sort of about to bore in on nanotechnology or something. And some people get quite scared about this. There is, for want of a better phrase, a bit of a hoodoo about this, almost a black art, I think, sometimes about this sort of stuff. How can you engage small, medium-sized enterprises in the importance of cyber risk? Start with that furthest away, and if you sort of make your way across the panel.
Is this working? Yes, it is. I think that, and I've got some personal experience of trying to sell a very, very simple insurance policy to SMEs. It's very difficult because they're bombarded by all sorts of those that are even sensitive to the subject and feel they've got a vulnerability. Do they buy insurance? Do they buy a better firewall? You know, which is the best firewall? You know, do they have a decent knowledge of how to avoid risk? So I think engaging with SMEs is very difficult. The sort of guy that is does his insurances on a Saturday night in front of the television, he's got a lot on his plate. And actually saying, oh, and you ought to buy cyber insurance, or you ought to take more care. Does he spend more on a firewall or more on a consultant, or does he spend more on insurance? It's a really difficult thing for a big company to solve. For small companies, there is I think, a lack of education, and it's tough.
Yeah, okay. Rachel, any thoughts on that?
From my point of view, I think you've got to reverse it and look that if you did encounter an attack, whether it be ransomware, malware, whatever it may be, that potentially is your reputation of your business gone. Why would a consumer want to come to you if you've had a data breach? So therefore, to me, it's absolutely critical to have some level of knowledge, or certainly a consultant or IT department, and allocate money. So when you're budgeting and for your business, okay, you're thinking, right, I need so much for whatever it is, staff or stationery, but you've got to include cybersecurity there, because sadly, it is happening, as I said, every 19 seconds, as the statistics show, and it's on the rise. Since COVID 2019, it's gone up 600% with regards to online attacks. And as I said before in my brief, sadly, we are, as in SMEs, are more susceptible to attacks because criminals know that we don't have the funding, we may not have the knowledge, and we certainly don't have the time when you're setting up a business. But you've got to balance it. What's more important? You're not going to have a business to run if you have a cyber attack. Yeah. So to me, it's pretty straightforward. And there are a lot of grants, loans, and companies out there that offer public funding, such as the Cyber Quarter, and it's just a case of carrying out due diligence, finding that information, because there is a lot of help for SMEs with regards to cyber, lots of trials, lots of credible companies, but that is the key, credible. Wherever you go, make sure that you do your research, get at least a good 3 sources, and that they are good reviews. It's not just, from so-and-so down the pub or whatnot.
Yeah, right, okay. And this room is full of people, I'm sure, who'll have that advice and that knowledge for you who want to try and follow that, and maybe the 4 of you will maybe take some advice and give some advice on that.
Well, I think the SME thing is a more severe symptom of something which is completely systemic, whether you're the DWP or Unilever or an SME. Cyber is the only part of an organisation that fails silently. For example, if you take HR or finance or facilities or operations, when something goes wrong, the fire alarm goes off. They know it's failed. But when AV fails, when a firewall fails, no one knows. Mm-hmm. And so everyone's gone and built these huge, great SIMs and SOCs, but the data's not getting to it because, if you look at third-party data, Microsoft released their Defender report yesterday, Verizon released one every year. 80% of all breaches could have been stopped with an existing security control that existed within the organization but was misconfigured. 82% of all breaches, just by digital height. So everyone's obsessed about initial access, scanning the outside, trying to get in. But like you said, you've got to assume that they're already inside. And so unless you actually test, not in a lab, but actually in production, is my system safe? If the CFO comes up to me and says, I saw this thing on Newsnight last night about these APT, somebody 29, something. Are we safe from that? Yes or no? This is a minuted meeting. And the CISO sits there and goes, I resign. and so you get this massive churn of CISOs who come from either a very technical background and don't know how to talk to the board, or the board get annoyed with that, so they put a business person in who then doesn't understand any of the technology. And their standard answer is, well, we need to spend more. More people, more resources, more firewalls, more boxes that go ding, more shiny this, more shiny that. And yet, if the amount you spend on solving a problem goes up, you'd expect the size of the problem to go down. But they don't. The number of attacks and ransomware correlates very neatly with the amount of money that's being spent. And that's because there's no closure of the feedback loop to tell you when something's going wrong. And so unless you're continually testing your systems, and to do that, so for example, we work very closely with MITRE and the MITRE attack framework, which is rather than a GRC top-down view of the world of governance, risk, and compliance, do you have multi-factor? Do you have a firewall? Do you have this? It's a bottom-up approach that says, well, the Chinese attack this way, using this kind of fingerprint and these methods, tactics, techniques, and procedures, and the Russians do it this way, and the Albanians do it that way, and this group does it that way. So let's automate, as you've said, automate all of that digital hygiene so that the few people that you do have don't suffer from log fatigue, where you're just looking at thousands of events which contain no useful information whatsoever. You know, it's just a constant string. I've been talking too long.
I think, and you should feel free, Chris.
I was going to say, no,
in,
I think, yeah, just jump in there, Bill. I mean, I've kind of worked in cybersecurity for 25 years across the globe, really. Middle East for 4 years, the US, and Frascati in Italy. And I think personally, maybe a little bit controversial, we do a rubbish job in explaining cybersecurity. Absolutely appalling. And cybersecurity is no different to physical security. Right. It's the same thing. And the problem that we've got with individuals, SMEs, enterprise, large organisations, is they can't quantify what do I need to be secure. Right. So what we've done across the globe, and again with customers, is if you've got I don't know, I'm from Birmingham, you know, if you've got a house in Hagley, you know, you're going to spend a certain amount on security and protecting that. And that firewall could be a gate, that AV could be an alarm system, you know, that IPS system, intrusion protection system, could be a dog. And I think we struggle as an industry to break it down. And that's something that I'm personally passionate about, is making sure that organisations can actually quantify and understand. And going back to what you alluded to, Bill, which I think is really, really important, you know, it's 2021. Right. I've been in the industry for 25 years. We're seeing more attacks this year than we've ever seen before. Yet we've got more products available than we've ever seen before. Now, think about that, guys. Just have a think for a second that we've got more technology solutions than we've ever had before, yet we've got more attacks. Imagine if that was the car industry. Imagine if that was, and that's something that I think as cybersecurity professionals we need to get better at. We're very good at talking about firewalls and again security operation centres and all this great stuff, but actually let's break it down. You know, do you have a CCTV? Do you have a gate? Is it locked?
And the history of the car correlates really exactly with right insurance as well. Yeah. I mean, in the days when I remember when immobilizers suddenly appeared on the market, and if you went to a third party that was accredited by my insurance company and they installed the immobilizer, my premium went down. Yeah. And so the same, but unless you've got that actuarial data to give to the insurers to say this is actually what's happening. It's not a lab, it's not pretend, it's real data. You know, I've run this test every hour, on the hour, for the last 6 months, and you can measure control drift and, you know.
I think that's absolutely the core of what I was trying to say earlier on, but done more eloquently. I do think that and we use a concept as well, blast radius, and we do deliberately use the phrase blast radius because it relates it to the physical world. If someone gets into this domain on your system, how far can they get and how much damage can they do before they get to something impenetrable? And so, and part of, I think, instrumenting people's systems is you can begin to build up, and believe it or not, CISOs can't do this for themselves. You know, global companies, if you say, well, can you give me a complete network log? Most of them can't give you a diagram of what connects to what. And therefore, they have no concept of what the blast radius is for someone getting into a particular spot. So I think the analogy is absolutely right. I think people have got to sort of stop thinking of it as something which is complicated and I don't need to get involved in. Boards need to understand it at a much greater level.
But to your point earlier, I picked up on the fact that if you look at that analogy of the history of car versus cyber, there's a point where you move from private insurance-owned fire brigades to the National Fire Brigade. In cars, you move from an environment where there were no roads, there were roads that were strictly private, and then, you know, whatever it is now, the National Highways Agency. But at some point, the state stepped in and created a sort of nationalised baseline that says we'll provide, as part of the social contract, you know, being a British citizen, you get street lighting, public roads, you know, the rule of law, and that, what happens in real life, to your point, is the same as what happens online. So there should ideally be a migration towards having some type of digital social contract that says that, if you reside within sort of UK borders, you get these certain protections and rights as if I was walking down the street. If I'm walking down Oxford Street, I do not expect to be hit over the head with a hammer without someone facing some sort of consequences.
It's a governmental question, and maybe something we can get to in a session that we're going to be holding this afternoon. You will observe there is a spare seat on the end of this panel. I've omitted to bring up another speaker for us. I don't know if Hugo is around. He's down there. How are you, sir?
Come on, Hugo. You want to join us?
Okay.
Sure. Come on.
So, Hugo's...
Question. Can't do that. You're a panellist, Hugo.
Hugo is Cybersecurity Innovation Specialist, works as Digital Projects Manager at the University of Wolverhampton. Will be hosting his own little session a little bit later. Do you want to come up, Hugo? While you do that, I will open the room up to questions, and while Hugo makes his way up to maybe take up the fifth pew here, we can. Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So Hugo's going to ask a question, but don't feel that this is great. By the way, this is a genuine conversation we're having here.
Absolutely.
And feel free to just chip in and buzz in when you like. But Hugo, go with your question, and let's see where this takes us.
It was actually regarding the nationalisation of the fire brigades and the challenges of centralising all that information into a point, and therefore people becoming dependent and trusting on the government to protect them, at the risk of, in effect, wiping out the cyber industry. So is there an alternative? Can we actually jump that nationalisation step and actually place something in for the cyber industry? So there is a common way of sharing that information. So parts are,
I would love there to be a cyber version of Ofgem or Ofwat, which was arm's length, connected to government, but not government, but independent regulator that could turn around to vendors, whether they be resellers or actual manufacturers or vendors, and go, oi, and pull them up by the, but they would be the owners of the framework in the way that Ofcom are the controllers of and Ofwat and so forth.
I think that there has to be a greater government involvement in the broad swathe of information technology. There was a really good BBC programme this week, yesterday maybe, about on Radio 4, about the use of AI to reproduce people's voices. And in a world where the voice down the phone may sound like your boss, but actually is someone who has hacked into your boss's, and they had some really good examples of, putting words into Biden's mouth or Trump's mouth or Boris Johnson's mouth. That's a task. And so someone has got to step in and regulate that, because if you cannot trust the voice at the other end of the phone, that really undermines a huge, great chunk of the world we live in.
Identity is our last perimeter, as you said.
Yeah.
I think with deepfake and absolutely getting people to talk about that. But Hugo, did you finish your question? Just quickly, or had you finished?
Yeah, it leads on to other parts, but it really is that main thing around bypassing, centralising everything and nationalising it, and the massive risk that places the entire country into, like Bill has just already touched on, that Ofgem part to it. And how do us as cyber businesses safely share those commercial vulnerabilities without it, at the same time undermining the company's position and trust, like Rachel was saying.
And again, I'll hand over to you, Rachel, but just quickly on that. So I fortunately spent a couple of years at GCHQ, and it was CSG when I was there, and they do sharing intelligence already, critical national infrastructure, intelligence in financial sectors. So there is a kind of, I don't want to call it a secret handshake, but there is already, especially in critical national infrastructure, sharing of intelligence. But I think we just need to be blunt. There's nothing 100% secure. I lived in a place, I'll talk about it. So I lived in Qatar, for 4 years, and there was something called Stuxnet. Now, I don't know, people may or may not be aware of that, but that was a piece of malware that was designed to stop the Iran nuclear facility enriching uranium. And supposedly, I should say, Phil here, because I could get into trouble. It was supposedly the Israelis, the US, and maybe the UK were involved that created this. Now, we don't know that for sure, but that's, again, me guessing. But if we think about that, I think the year was 2008, 2009, That's what they were doing 13 years ago. It's 2021. Imagine what these guys are doing now. So I agree, I think, with the premise of the conversation, Hugo, and the fire service there. But at the end of the day, they have to look after. Trying to look after everything isn't going to work. It's never worked in civilization. It's never worked when people have controlled empires. It just hasn't worked. They have to focus on what I would deem as critical national infrastructure. Businesses have to support themselves. It's a bit like an accountant. I don't like talking to accountants. No, accountants are fantastic for anyone in the audience. I've really enjoyed their time and company. But again, it's not my cup of tea. So ultimately, from that perspective, I have to pay an accountant to deal with HMRC. Okay. And that's a cost.
So if I can broaden that thought out, if I might a little more, Rachel, feel free to chip in on this, particularly with your own area of expertise. Are national governments really the solutions to these problems? I mean, the nature of the fact that you're all gathered in this room today, you're all sat here as our, esteemed expert panel is that you are actually individuals, right? Absolutely. And that these problems aren't necessarily sorted out at national governmental level. Yes, you would all like more interaction with the government. You'd all like more government support, and we're going to hear a bit more, I'm sure, later on today about how we might go about doing that. But actually, is nationalising this, or having, to quote Bill's idea, a Bill of Rights for cybersecurity, the right response? Rachel, do you want to chip in on that first?
I don't want to start World War III here, but, how much trust do we have in the government? It's down to personal choice again. I mean, you've only got to look at the news and, we've got fuel crisis, we've got the Brexit going on, we can't even get from A to B, without protesters blocking the motorways and just basic things at the point where people are worrying about heating their homes, where are they going to get money from because they're, not having their £20 a week universal credit and so on. So are we prepared to put our businesses, our livelihood, again, even more so in the government's hands?
Well, let's throw that out to everybody.
But there are global organisations like MITRE,
Yeah.
so they work.
So
I think that's absolutely right. But I think where governments do have a role to play is setting some basic standards, creating some organisations which support SME standards. Ultimately, whether there should be a fire brigade, that means a sort of a global or UK-wide help desk. I think probably that is better organised at a local sort of insurance company level. But who regulates those? How good are the help desks? How good are the standards? What is the legislative framework around things like AI use of voice? That sort of thing is where governments do play a role and have to play a role because look at the dark web, which was incidentally created by a US government initiative in the first place. Stuxnet was an American, thing that got wrong. In fact, a lot of the attack paths have come from stored 0 days by, intelligence communities who then themselves got hacked and lost them all. So governments have played actually a particularly difficult role at times in wanting to both be able to access people's systems and at the same time protect them from those attacks.
The source of the problem, not very much the solution, maybe.
Yeah. At the same time, there are some really good independent companies, such as MITRE, but also Whois.com and Maltego and things like that. And I honestly believe that it's a case of SMEs. I know you just got to try and find time somewhere because it's easy to turn on the news, but actually, how much cyber news are you actively searching for and researching and listening to? How many podcasts are you looking at? There's Recorded Future, there's FireEye, there's Cyberwire. There's some really, really good, as I keep saying, nuggets of information out there that helps SMEs. It tells you about, there's a CVE site, the common vulnerabilities as well. So it tells you about the latest hacks and attacks and when they were patched, how they were fixed. And it's just little things like if you're getting prompts to update your software, it's normally because your Apple Store or Google Play Store, whatever, Microsoft and Kali Linux, etc., has found a vulnerability and they're trying to help you and by saying, update your software so we can fix it so that you're not susceptible to attacks. It's just a case of publicising it, marketing it more, because as you know, having specialised in intelligence and everything, I'm aware of it, but I don't expect every SME to be notified about that, and that's why I think it's how do we pass that information on, and I can only do it in my role as a consultant or just generally. Sadly, I'm not up on stage like you every day, being able to help the public by saying, actually, try this, try that podcast, try that radio station, instead of just turning on the BBC, no offence, news, maybe ITV, or Channel 4 News.
You're the Secretary of
Sky.
State for Cyber Affairs. I think you just made a really good case for there. But is there another question from the floor before I ask for more information? Yes, over here.
I'm that thickest pig shit SME business owner, and I think the really
It's great to have you.
Just book an appointment, come to the cyber quarter, you'll be fine, I'll sort you out.
the point is actually for me, what is it that I need? So what I've not heard yet really is actually what should you check that you have got and haven't got? So I don't know where I'm starting from. And keep it simple, talk in English.
Yeah, that's a great question, and then so I'll deal with that, and then I'll pass it on. But yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, you're not a useless pig. You're an entrepreneur keeping this country going. So congratulations on you. Firstly, that's the first thing to say. The second thing, you're busy running your business, and cybersecurity and making sure it's protected is very difficult. And as I alluded to previously, you have to think of it like physical security. So you may have a big house, and you may have CCTV. You may have a dog. You may have big gates. Maybe you haven't got the crown jewels, so you haven't got the 7-foot bouncer at the front door. That's the same as you look at it. So actual things like, and again, Rachel alluded to it, update your software. Do you do things like vulnerability scanning monthly? If not, you should do. Do you have monitoring? These are the kind of technical solutions you can do very, very easily. And sorry for putting my hand up, the light's just shining on me, so I'm trying to look at your face. But hopefully these are the basics that one can do to improve their cybersecurity maturity. Going back to the point though, there is nothing as 100% secure. Unless you just don't know the internet. And even then there's tempest and so forth. But again, it's literally cost versus risk. You have to understand the risk to your business, and you have to put the appropriate costs in place. So we wouldn't recommend a £3 million solution for a business that's turning over 100 grand a year. That would be ridiculous. But what we would recommend is that you do things like scanning once a month, and there's some great companies here today that you can speak to about that. We'd look at maybe having a bit of a one-day consultant. Cyber Essentials get you on the right path, which we haven't talked about. These are the basic things that organisations can do today to at least get you to sleep better at night. Now, I'll pass that on to the board to add, if they've got anything they want to add or...
More advice?
Or more advice.
Well, one thing I would say is go and look at insurance, and at this moment in time, a standalone insurance policy, and make sure that if you do buy one, you buy one which has got a really good help desk, so that if you have a problem, you can phone someone up and they are motivated to get you out of trouble as quickly as possible, because they're going to be paying the losses if they don't help you. So I think that's a really good second defence. Get your house in order, but then buy some sort of risk transference and risk mitigation.
Another thing I'd add very quickly as well is that we do lots of work with MITRE, with the organisation that first came up with CVEs, of the taxonomy of vulnerabilities and so forth, and they now have the same concept for all of the tactics, techniques and procedures, the way that bad guys actually get in. And I've forgotten what I was going to say about this. The point being that you can apply those to, one of the answers that SMEs often come up with is, I'm just going to move it to the cloud, and Microsoft or AWS or Google will look after me, and that will be that, because it's, they're looking after it. But if you look at any of their shared responsibility models, the cloud providers are very clear about what they look after and what they do not look after. And I think some education around what's actually, people assume that, if it's all in O365 and I've put Defender in and I've bought my E5 license and I've got Sentinel and it's all being looked after, then it's okay. Yeah. But that's not actually the case, because people think they're buying a sort of, an automatic music center, and what they end up with is Led Zeppelin recording console. We've recently completed, the MITRE has attached to it now, because the work's grown so much, an organisation I'd recommend to you all called the Centre for Threat Informed Defence. And the Centre for Threat Informed Defence produce blueprints of best practices. So, if you're building an online store, in Google, they do it this way, and they map everything back to the MITRE ATT&CK frameworks and so forth. But even when we've recently completed mapping all of the security controls in Azure back to MITRE ATT&CK framework so that you can see them. And even Microsoft themselves were unaware of the fact that there are 48 separate security controls in Azure. So that's not just 48 switches, but that's 48 entire, panels with their knob switches, and that hence the Led Zeppelin recording console. And SMEs aren't expecting that. They're expecting it to be configured right, and it's not. It's blank. Everything's sort of set at 0, and it's up to you to tune it to the way you want it.
Well, and the other thing which big companies suffer from and SMEs will is if you have that sort of thing, you get lots of false positives.
Right.
And if your fire alarm is going off every 15 minutes, what do? You ignore it after a while, and of course that doesn't really give you what you needed, which is a fire alarm when there's a fire.
Yeah.
So marrying the right technology to something which is going to eliminate the false positives is one of the problems with Defender. I would say that because I've got the solution, but it is. And so I do think that for SMEs, it's beyond the capability of an SME to deal with that sort of thing. Just can't do it.
Okay. We're going to break for lunch in a second, but I think just on behalf of our questioner, I just said the fact that you're even here today suggests that you have a concern, you're doing the right thing about it, and, increasingly one thing that will come out of this today is that we're all aware that cybersecurity is more and more important for businesses, and taking some time out of your day, as you've done from your business, just to come and find out a bit more about this and inform yourself can only better protect you in the future. There's a gentleman over there, had his hand up, sir, very quickly, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Stuart from DCMS. I'm talking later, hopefully to answer the question.
Great.
And it's basically short summary of what I will take 20 minutes to say is, if you look at Cyber Essentials, there are 5 basic controls there which any company can look at and do. And then have a look at the National Cybersecurity Centre's website. They've got some really good advice, and it's well written and easy to read. So we've got 2 takeaways, Cyber Essentials and NCS's website.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. And look, some from DCMS we can tap into a little bit later on. If you stick around, then that session's coming up this afternoon. So please go downstairs, grab some lunch, grab a coffee, refresh, and we will talk more in a little while. Those of you who are very relaxed and want to keep your seats, then please feel free to do that. While we take lunch, there's going to be a recording up on the screen of evaluation of cybersecurity readiness of e-tailing organisations. So that will be playing whilst lunch is taken. Thank you very much. We'll be back shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks to our panel.